Welcome here to Church of the Beatitudes. Good to see you. And those of you who are with us online, welcome back. If this is the first time that you are here with us online or in person, a special welcome to you. And we believe that what we stand for here at Beatitudes makes a difference in how individuals feel about themselves and how they live their life and how they treat each other. So that is one of the reasons why we come together, is to be able to find ways to fully become human and then make a difference in how we interact with other people. So there's many opportunities that help us do that, and Janelle, you have some of them.
I do, but first I want to ask you, where's your purple shirt?
I don't own a purple shirt.
What?
No, I don't.
You do know what March is?
It's the third month of the year.
Okay, good. Let me give you a
Thank
little
you.
bit. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
No, it's Women's History Month.
It's Women's History Month?
Yes. And you wear purple as a way to commemorate the month and show solidarity.
With?
So you have purple.
So to show solidarity to women in history.
Yeah, to honor women's history and their contribution. We have a whole month of it, so you still have time to get a purple shirt.
Okay, I'll work on that.
Yeah, you should.
Yeah.
And what better way to start off Women's History Month than Women in Faith? We are meeting next Saturday in room 4 at 9:30, and we invite all of you to come, women of the church and visitors, to come join us. We're doing a really interesting study, and it's a time of great fellowship. So I invite you all to come next Saturday. And I also, here, I need you to hold something. You know what this is?
Yes, I do.
Do you know what this is?
Yes, I do.
Are you going to tell them?
Nope.
Nope, that's my job.
Yep.
Well, Faith in Action, they are doing their Lenten food drive to help nourish Phoenix. And if you have not already done so, on your way out of the church today, there you go, pick up a bag and a list of food donation items, and then bring it back to us by Palm Sunday, and we will be giving it to Nourish Phoenix.
Fantastic.
Good job.
Thank you.
And one more thing, I want you to mark your calendars for jazz.
Yes. Yes, I like jazz.
I know you do. You
Especially
went to the last one.
I like jazz when I'm wearing a purple shirt.
Great. I'll hold you to that.
Yes.
You're going to be wearing a purple shirt at the jazz concert coming up on the 20th. It's a Sunday. And it's going to be a jazz trio made up of, well, they're called the Tom Wakeling Jazz Trio, but they have a special guest that's going to be joining them.
And we're not allowed to tell who that is yet.
No. So it's a surprise.
Yeah.
So you have to come and
It
see
is
who
definitely
the special
worth your
guest
time
is.
to come.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It's free, and it's going to be live streamed. So we encourage you to either come or you can hear it online. And if you do come, please leave a $10 love donation for our music and arts
So
program.
it's free, but
We
donations are encouraged.
Thank you very
Yes.
much. You said that very well. And then don't forget, after service today is coffee hour.
Yes.
Munchies.
Yes.
Over in the chapel and out in the plaza, there are plenty of tables. So please come join us. We've missed everyone, and now we get to see everyone.
Yes, and that brings us to the latest shift that has taken place. We are now worshiping with Mass optional. So those of you who choose to wear a mask, feel free. Those of you who choose not to wear a mask, feel free. We are truly allowing that option to individuals. And I must admit, I appreciate seeing all of your face. That is something that I have missed a lot, is being up here at times. It just feels different. And but again, at the Beatitudes, we respect everyone's freedom to make that choice for themselves and what they are comfortable with. Also, a big thank you to each and every one of you. We ended last year in the black. We were further in our donations than what we actually had budgeted for. And in the time of COVID, that's huge. And so a major thank you to all of you. Sometimes I know it can be discouraging on Sunday mornings because the amount of people that we normally were worshiping prior to COVID, it's like, where did everyone go? On the other side, we have to understand that a lot of our communication is now taking place through the live stream that we offer. And so individuals perhaps are not coming as often, but please understand that that phenomena is not unique to our church. More and more churches are seeing that a person who considers themselves a regular attender actually only attends once or twice a month. So church attendance is shifting dramatically, and it has been for decades. Often in mainline churches, one of the things that takes place is people think, well, mainline churches are diminishing, their attendance is declining. However, understand when that started. The decline of mainline churches like ours happened as early as the 1960s. That's when the mainline churches' attendance began declining. However, we've also realized that that declining does not necessarily mean that all mainline churches are eventually going to close. There is a feeling within mainline churches, such as the United Church of Christ, that more than ever, churches like this and many others are needed in our society. That they are giving an alternative way of looking at Christianity, and they believe that is important. And so I think the way we ended last year with your giving is an indicator that you still believe in what Church of the Beatitudes stands for and what it's about. The other thing that we are introducing this week is we will be offering something that is new, and now we feel with COVID and the numbers dropping, it's the right time to introduce it again. Is right after the service, up here to my right, there will be one of our lay ministers, her name is Lucy, who will be here available for one-on-one prayers. We experienced this on Ash Wednesday, and it was phenomenal. If you would like to have someone who would just be willing to pray for you, she will be here to share that with you. The other thing that's important to understand is that Lucy has been trained in this. It's something that is a passion of hers, of being able to pray for other people. And I was on the receiving end of that, and it was powerful to have someone verbally pray for me. It had been a long time since I actually had someone pray for me, and I very much appreciated that. So that will be available. The other two things that we will be introducing is we will be introducing responsive readings, and we will continue to look at the numbers, and we hope to introduce even more elements that make our church interactive. Because one of the challenges that we've seen over the last 2 years is that church has actually become really easy to become passive. As someone who's sitting there, your involvement has been negated because of the fears around COVID. But now that we are beginning to see those numbers drop, we want to encourage that again. So the question I have for you this morning is very simple. Are you ready for worship? And I'm talking more than just getting dressed and getting here. Are you personally ready for this spiritual encounter that we are going to have? For too long, we've created an environment where you have been passive. What we hope to do is restore that activeness into our worship. And being an active participation in worship is more than just speaking, and that's a big part of it. It's more than just singing, but it's also preparing yourself to be able to go inside of yourself, and all the troubles and the worries that you've had in the past week, or you might be having in this coming week, now's your opportunity to set those aside. And just to be open to experience whatever it is you do with the divine. And please understand that some of you will walk out of here and you will have had an experience that made you feel better. There will, however, be times when you walk out of here and the experience might actually leave you feeling uncomfortable. And if you read in the Bible, we find that that literally happens when people encounter God. They find comfort, but they also can find discomfort. And so I'm not sure what you will feel, because that is beyond my realm. We are just conduits of creating an atmosphere for you to experience the divine. And one of the ways that we can do that is by collectively praying. And it's been a long time since we've been able to actually have responsive prayers. I invite you to join with me in this responsive prayer. I will be reading the light print, and if you will join in on the reading of the dark print. Loving God, we pray for the world and especially Ukraine. Please join with me. For those whose names we do not know, whose faces we will never see. If you'll listen now. Instill in us a yearning for peace. And now let us join together. A yearning so strong that we let love replace fear and dare to take the risk to trust that love is the most powerful force in the world. Amen. I hope you didn't go too quickly over that last phrase we just said. That love is the most powerful force in the world. That takes a lot of faith to make that statement. With what's happening in Europe right now, that one's hard to believe. But that's why we come here, is to challenge ourselves to think out of the box, to really embrace the idea that love is the answer. I hope you will consider that and think about that as you listen to this first song.
With his spirit and his love, let him fill your heart and satisfy your soul. Oh, let him have the things that hold you, and his spirit like a dove will descend upon your life and make you whole. Your hearts are filled with joy. Lift your hands in sweet surrender to his name. Oh, give him all your tears and sadness. Give him all your years of pain, and you'll enter into life in Jesus' name.
If this were the final week of your life, what would your Monday look like? Would it be a grand marathon bucket list venture? Or would you just kind of sit back and keep your same old routine? Our Lenten Worship Series, One Week That Changed the World, follows the final week of Jesus' ministry and life. And while you'd think he purposed to rush around Jerusalem circling the wagons, maybe it was just sandwiches, fig trees, and a field trip to the temple. Here's what Scripture relates to us about probably his Monday from Mark 11:12-21. The next morning, as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. He noticed a fig tree in full leaf a little way off, so he went over to see if he could find any figs. But there were only leaves because it was too early in the season for fruit. Then Jesus said to the tree, "May no one ever eat your fruit again." And the disciples heard him say it. When they arrived back in Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple and began to drive out the people buying and selling animals for sacrifices. He knocked over the tables of the money changers and the chairs of those selling doves. And he stopped everyone from using the temple as a marketplace. He said to them, "The Scriptures declare, 'My temple will be called a house of prayer for all nations,' but you have turned it into a den of thieves." When the leading priests and teachers of religious law heard what Jesus had done, they began planning how to kill him. But they were afraid of him because the people were so amazed at his teaching. That evening, Jesus and the disciples left the city. The next morning, as they passed by the fig tree that he had cursed, the disciples noticed that it had withered from the roots up. Peter remembered what Jesus had said to the tree on the previous day, and he exclaimed, "Look, Rabbi, the fig tree you cursed has withered and died."
Unstated expectations. If we're really honest with ourselves, one of the things that we will have to admit is that in our relationships with other people, be those intimate, close relationships or the relationships of just the individual that you might be working next to, all of our relationships have a certain amount of expectations. Unfortunately, a lot of our relationships, those expectations are unstated. We assume them, and we assume that the other person knows what our expectations are, but they're rarely stated. And what happens is we become offended when someone doesn't meet those unstated expectations. So if someone treats you a certain way or someone neglects to do something, you may feel personally offended because they did something to you. They didn't fulfill your expectations. So we become angry. And our brain has ways of dealing with that. When we have these expectations that go unmet and we feel that somehow we have been wronged by another individual, our brain, depending upon the past experiences that we have had, our brain figures out and even subconsciously will communicate, this is how you respond. This is how you respect yourself and protect yourself against that individual. Unstated expectations. It happens all the time. You call a family member, you call a friend, you leave them a message, they don't reply. The expectation is that they will reply. And when they don't, all of that just naturally kicks in. But what happens when we have expectations around God? How many of us have actually stopped and thought about that? What expectations do I have toward God? What do I want from God? And not only that, but flip it the other way and ask yourself, what does God expect from you? The reality is we probably have these expectations and we just don't think about them that often. And when God is said to act in a certain way, or someone says something about God, or something happens in our life that doesn't align with what we expect to receive from God, it creates the same dynamics that take place in our interpersonal relationships with each other. The challenge, though, is sometimes the expectations we have of God and God toward us create difficulties in how we live with each other. A perfect example of this was seen at the time when Jesus walked here on this earth in the first century. Perfect example of it. At that time, when it came to what the people saw God expecting of them, what it is God wanted from them, you found that answer in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the center of the Judeo world at that time. Not only because it was the center of as far as the politics, but it was also the center as far as religion. And at that time in the first century, politics and religion were very closely wed together, because the Roman power at that time and the religious leaders had to interact with each other on a regular basis. They were the power brokers of Jerusalem. But that is where everyone found their sense of what it was that God expected from them, what God wanted from them, and what they in turn could expect from God. One of the greatest things people can share with us from that time, as you read in the New Testament, and it comes out of the Old Testament too, is that people expected a sense of safety and security coming from God. God ultimately was seen as being in control of everything. God is the one who gave order to chaos. God is the one who was in control of nature. God was the one who would have you be able to and protect you when things were tough. So if there was a lack of rain, you prayed to God. When there was a threat from a foreign entity, you prayed to God. And in some ways, we do the same thing. Look at the prayers that, if you flip through social media, people are praying for Ukraine. Somehow they believe that God will intervene either directly to stop the war or to give support and protection to those who are the victims of that war. There's somehow, our prayers are based upon this idea that we expect God to keep us safe. And what happens when those expectations are not met? What happens when a young boy below the age of 8 dies of a brain aneurysm within 24 hours? When our expectations are not met, that creates this problem for us. But in the first century, the majority of people believed that it was because of the temple. That's where God was seen to dwell. That's how you had access to God. They believed that as long as they were loyal to God, that God would protect them, that God would bring order and control in their lives. And that gave them a great sense of well-being. In the midst of uncertainty, it was God who they believed would give certainty. So what did God want in return? Well, the two demands of God are really quite simple. Number one, God required sacrifices. Now, when we hear the word sacrifice, the majority of us begin to think about that somehow God has to see an animal die so that God can forgive us. That idea is really new, because when you go back, the majority of time when the word sacrificed is used, it referred to two elements. Number one, gifts. Number two, meals. So in your relationship with each other, that's the two factors that would keep your relationship with another human being when you lived in that first century environment alive. You would give gifts and you would share a meal. Well, that ties in perfectly to sacrifices. In the agricultural world, you gave what was considered your first fruits. That first cutting, you gave a portion of that to God. That was a gift. That was a way of thanking God for God having met God's expectations of making certain that you would have a crop. That was a thank you to God. Now, the second gift was one of a meal. And so when you went and you offered a sacrifice to God, you were offering God a meal. What was amazing is that you would give God your meal, and in return, God would give you part of it back. So how did God eat the meal? Well, the blood was poured out on the altar. And then the meat was cooked. Sometimes only the priest got to eat of it. Other times, you got a portion back. But this idea of what God expected from humanity was first and foremost sacrifice, gifts, and a sharing of a meal. The second thing that God expected was that you would be loyal just to God. There would be no other gods. You would worship no other deities, Roman, Greek, before that, Persian, Babylonian, Canaanite gods. None of those were allowed. What God required of you was fidelity, one-on-one loyalty to God. And then last of all, that God required obedience, obedience to God's law. What's amazing, again, is you go to the Old Testament and you read some of these laws, they're really vague. I mean, just think about the Sabbath, the fourth commandment. All it says is, don't work. Well, you know what? That allows a lot of room for interpretation. It was only later on that individuals came along and said, we can't give that much freedom to human beings. We need to spell it out for them. And so they came up with what was called the Haggadah, rules, to take these vague laws and make them very specific. But what was alive during that period of time was that these laws were vague enough that the religious leaders figured out that there was a lot of wiggle room in those laws. That they could take those laws and they could still be loyal to God, and at the same time that they could use them to their advantage. And so the religious leaders at that time began to move and shape those laws in such a way and interpret them in such a way that it gave them that freedom to actually begin to flourish, to gain more power, to gain more money. And then in the process, they actually began to oppress other human beings. And they still felt really good about themselves. They could go to the temple and felt that they had met God's expectations. And if they met God's expectations, then they could expect that God would fulfill his expectations for them. It is this problem that Jesus became aware of. The majority of time that Jesus, while he was here on this earth, the majority of that time was not spent in the big cities. It was in the rural surrounding areas. And Jesus was able to see the impact of how the religious leaders lived their lives and how they met God's expectations, how it trickled down and affect the quality of the life of those individuals in the rural areas. He saw them lose their land. He saw them go further and further into debt. He saw them have expectations placed upon them of what God wanted for them that was different than anyone else. Jesus was the witness of that. And in that last week, Jesus decided to go and address the issue head on in Jerusalem. Because that's the hub, that's the center. And what's amazing is on this Monday of that last week of Jesus' life, Jesus has an experience. And the writer of the Gospel of Mark creates this in such a way that the easiest way to explain the format that he uses in telling this story is that imagery of a sandwich. Now, the majority of sandwiches that I am accustomed to have two pieces of bread, one for each side. By the way, how do you know which way is up or down on a sandwich? Think about it. So you have two pieces, and then you put something in between. And it could be simple as that rich quality sandwich of peanut butter and jelly. Or it can become more elaborate, and you put all sorts of things in between those two pieces. But it's those two pieces that hold together the sandwich. Well, the writer of the Gospel of Mark has a way of telling stories in the format of a sandwich. There's one piece of bread, then there's another piece of bread, and then there's everything in between. So everything in between is supposed to be understood by looking at the two pieces of bread. If you look at the two pieces of bread first, you'll understand what's in the middle. And that's exactly how the gospel writer of Mark describes what happens to Jesus on this last Monday of his life. And he gives us clues. In Mark chapter 11, verse 12, the next morning, it was Sunday, Palm Sunday, that he enters Jerusalem. The next morning, verse 12 says, you skip down at verse 20, the next morning. That alone tells you, watch out for that sandwich. These two pieces of bread. And what happens is on the first piece of bread, the story says that Jesus was hungry. I did a search on that Greek word hungry. And in the Gospel of Mark, this is the only time that it appears. This is so insightful. It's supposed to kind of all of a sudden wake you up. When they give you information that is more than is required, the writer is saying, hey, pay attention to this. So immediately when you hear Jesus was hungry, you expect something. And it says that Jesus was hungry, and in the distance he saw a fig tree. And he went to the fig tree expecting to find figs. But he saw no figs, and he was disappointed to the point where he decided to say the following. Listen to what it says. May no one ever eat from your tree again. Now, one of the reasons why many individuals don't take this story literally is it goes completely against what the majority of people assume to be about Jesus. Jesus does not speak ill to the majority of individuals other than the religious leaders. But here, if you take it literally, you have Jesus getting upset at a fig tree for just doing what a fig tree does. In fact, the writer of the Gospel of Mark explains that, oh, by the way, you shouldn't have expected figs because it was the wrong time of year. And so immediately, all of a sudden, as a reader, you realize we shouldn't be taking this literally. And that sets you up in that sandwich to begin to understand what's going on in the middle. So on the one side, all of a sudden, Jesus says he's hungry. He goes to the fig tree. By now, Jesus should know that you don't expect fig trees fruit from that tree during this time of year. But Jesus becomes upset, and he curses the fig tree. That's the beginning of that day. The next day, as they're making their way back to Jerusalem, they pass that same fig tree. Listen to what it says. Peter remembers what Jesus had said, and he says to Jesus, "Look, the fig tree you cursed has withered and died." That's the second half of the sandwich. The first side says Jesus curses the tree. The second part of the sandwich says that Jesus recognizes that his curse came true, but the tree withered up and it died. Why? Because it did not provide fruit. That is how we are supposed to understand what happens in the middle. And what is it that happens in the middle? What we typically call the cleansing of the sanctuary, of the temple. When Jesus goes in, you've heard the story perhaps, where Jesus goes in, he throws tables over, he chases people out of the temple, stops them from walking through carrying loads of stuff, which, by the way, was normal, everyday activity that would occur in the temple. The other thing that we have to remember is the temple. 35 acres. That's the size of the temple. So what you have to understand is what the writer is describing is just probably what Jesus has done in this small little corner of the temple. And many people feel that Jesus was cleansing the temple at that time. But maybe instead, if we looked at that sandwich, we realize what Jesus was really doing was the same thing that happened to that fig tree. Jesus had watched and seen what was happening. He understood how the religious leaders were using the temple as a way of oppressing other human beings. And Jesus says, that is not what God expects from you. And so just as Jesus cursed that tree and it withered up and died, symbolically the writer is telling us that when Jesus went in there, he did the exact same thing. He basically said, this has got to stop. You have such a sense of false security that you believe that as long as you show up in the temple, you give your offerings, you give your sacrifices, you're obedient to God, as long as you do all that, then you're good with God. So the expectations they had of what God required of them, and in turn what they expected from God, was what was creating the problem. And Jesus says it needs to stop. That's what got him killed. The status quo, according to Jesus, could no longer stay the way it was. And when you mess with the status quo, people don't like it. We become comfortable, sometimes comfortable even in our discomfort, because that's all we know. And Jesus has the courage to say, what you expect from God and what you in turn believe that God expects of you has got to change. Because you're continuing to hurt other people. So this comes to the point of the sermon where I'm supposed to move from talking about the first century to the 21st century. And I thought a lot about how I could apply this to our lives here in Phoenix, Arizona in the 21st century. And then I remember what one of my professors told me. He said, Tony, he said, the majority of ministers believe their church members are stupid. And I thought, why would you say that? Why would you think church members, or why would you think that we as ministers think our church members are stupid? And he says, because we always want to apply it to their lives. He says, why don't we believe that they're smart enough to apply it for themselves? I mean, think about that. How many people are here, right? There's no way I can apply this sermon to each and every one of you. What I do is more of a shotgun approach, right? I shoot out an application and I hope it hits someone. But ultimately, the question is how do you think this applies to your life? So I'm going to ask you two questions. If you have your cell phone, now is a great time to pull it out. Because you can type in on your notes these two questions. And if you don't have your cell phone, if you want to grab a piece of pen or a piece of paper and write these down, because there's two questions that I would like you to reflect on this week. And that means you're going to have to be intentional. If you would, this is your homework assignment. Something that spiritually could make a difference for you. Here's the first question. What do you believe let me back it up. What do you believe that you expect from God? What is it that you expect from God? Think about that. Your answer is probably tied into your view of God. If you're a theist and you believe that God is active in your life, then what you expect God to do for you is going to be different from the person who's a deist. Someone who believes that God started out and created our world or the environment that the world would take form, and then God stepped back. You see, your view of God is going to impact that answer, but that question is significant for you to think about. What does God expect? What do you expect from God? Do you expect God to protect you? Do you expect God to give you a sense of security? Do you expect God someday to give you eternal life? Or do you expect nothing? How often have you taken the time to really think about that? And here's my second question for you. What does God expect of you? Or what does God demand of you? Does God lay any claims to your life? That answer will give you a lot of insight to what you believe about God and even what you believe about yourself. You see, a lot of our relationships are based upon unstated expectations. And I think the same thing happens in our relationship with God. Maybe now is the time to stop and really reflect upon what those expectations are. I can't give you the answer. And you don't have to take the time and find an answer. But I believe that if you take the time and reflect on this, it could make a difference in the quality of your life. You might find some really interesting things about yourself and about your God. That makes a difference in how you see yourself and in turn, how you treat other people. It's up to you. I honestly believe you're smart enough to figure this one out on your own. So I'm going to shut up and sit down. Beginning of worship, I stated that at Beatitudes, we try to create an environment that speaks to your mind as well as your feelings and your thoughts and your spirit. So I'm going to do something that will tap more into this right now. So to the degree that you're comfortable, that's up to you to participate. So So our form of prayer is going to take that, and then at the end of that, we're going to join together and do something that we've been waiting a long time to be able to do together, and that's to be able to say the Lord's Prayer in unison. So if you are comfortable, and if you'd like to participate, I invite you to close your eyes. And because we value not only the mind, but we value the emotions that are tied to that, I'm going to ask you to be in tuned to your emotions at this point. And I'm going to make it a statement. And I want you to be curious as to what emotion is evoked when you hear it. I don't want you to judge that emotion. I just want you to be aware of it. Be curious. Where is this coming from? Here we go. God has many demands that He puts on your life. Don't think about it rationally. What emotion does that evoke within you? Second one. God has no expectations whatsoever that God places upon you. What emotional response did that statement evoke for you? Why? Did you feel relief? Did you feel anxious? If we listen to our emotions, that's where we can begin to discover some of our ideas about God. This is part of the exercise I would like you to try during the week. This is a form of prayer I invite you to experience throughout this week. Jesus understood the importance of a community, of people coming together to be able to journey and reflect together. And one of the ways of doing that is by doing something together. So let us join together as we speak the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, kingdom come.
Oh God, now let your servant go in peace. Your word has been fulfilled. My own eyes your salvation have seen, prepared by you
our time has come to a close. I want to thank you so much for having given us a part of your time and having shared in your presence with each other. I would encourage you, if you're comfortable, if you have the time, to stay for coffee hour. It's a great opportunity to connect with someone new, perhaps, or to reacquaint yourself with someone that you haven't seen for some time. But before you leave, and those of you who are watching us, before you turn off that VCR. Gosh. I'm missing more than hair, that's for sure. Before you turn off your computer, your phone, whatever it is you're watching us on, please receive this blessing. May you be blessed with a sense of serenity to accept your view of God right now. That view of God has been formed over decades for you. May you be blessed with a sense of serenity, just to accept that right now, to value it, appreciate. But may you also be blessed with a sense of courage. Courage to be able to maybe think of God in new ways, to open yourself to new ways of experiencing God. And then may you be blessed with a spirit of love. Because Jesus, the one that we choose to follow, summarized all of who God was for him in one word: love. So may you be blessed with the spirit of love, first and foremost, that you will experience love of self. And then allow that love that you have for yourself to come forth from you in the way that you love other people. So may you be blessed with a spirit of love and go forth and make love real for someone this week. Amen.